Hello, welcome back. We are continuing on with Unit 2.1, Mechanisms of Homeostasis and Bioengineering. And today we're going to start looking at Part 3, Homeostasis in Other Organisms. So let's get going. So, homeostasis is by no means a human thing. It is an organism thing. It is a life thing. Even single-celled organisms maintain homeostasis. Many of the homeostatic processes seen in humans occur in other organisms as well. So, other things like lizards and snakes and fish and bacteria and dogs and insects, they all go through and do homeostasis as well. And they all have to maintain the same criteria. However, they just do it using different mechanisms. Like we mentioned, when we get hot, humans sweat. The liquid will then, what happens when we sweat is, we secrete that liquid out of our pores. I know it sounds gross and is sometimes stinky, but it's for a purpose. What happens is we get covered with that thin layer of sweat, and then in the heat, it's going to evaporate off our skin. But when it evaporates, it actually pulls the heat with it, which is why sweat helps to cool us down. Now, dogs don't really have sweat glands. I mean, they kind of do, but they also kind of don't. So for instance, most of their body, they actually don't. But they actually do have sweat glands on the pads of their feet to help keep their feet cool on hot surfaces. But that's not enough to cool down their whole body. So it's, what they do instead is they pant, like two cute little puppers at the bottom pictures. Now what happens is the panting does the same thing as our sweating does. It just does it in a slightly different way. So when they pant, the dogs are taking these very short and shallow breaths. So what they're doing is they're directing air over these moist linings in their upper respiratory tract. And they stick their tongue out when they pant because they're trying to maximize the surface area of these moist linings that are being exposed to the air. They stick their tongue out and they pant these short, shallow breaths. What it does is it brings the warm air into these linings and is actually going to evaporate some of the moisture out of the linings. Then they breathe it back out. And just like how the sweat pulls the heat out of our skin when it evaporates, it pulls the heat out of the dogs when it evaporates out of that moist upper respiratory tract lining. So because it's pulling the heat out, it does help to cool them down, and that's why they will pant. It's not necessarily because they're out of breath or that, something's wrong. It's just how they cool themselves down. Let's talk a little bit about gas exchange. Plants do homeostasis. Surprise! So in the underside of leaves, now this right here in the bottom right is a zoomed in photograph of the underside of a leaf. Now, it's not just zoomed in like on your phone. This is using a type of microscope. Each one of these are cells, but you'll also notice that they have these weird little openings here. There's one there, and one there. These are stomata. Stomata are pores on the underside of leaves, and these are what allow for gas exchange in plants. Now for us, we do gas exchange in our lungs. We take in air, goes to our lungs, we absorb the oxygen into our bloodstream, we deposit carbon dioxide from the bloodstream into the lungs, and then we breathe out the carbon dioxide as well as water vapor. But for plants, they don't have lungs, but they do have these stomata. So the stomata are the different pores. And what happens is when they're open, it allows carbon dioxide to flow into them because the plant cells, specifically those on the leaves, that's where photosynthesis occurs. And photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide and water in order to create glucose. Remember, plants don't eat. So they get glucose for their cells by making it through photosynthesis. So they take in the carbon dioxide through these pores. They absorb it up into these pores, kind of like how we breathe and take in oxygen. Now, just like how we exhale and get rid of the carbon dioxide, the oxygen gas can also exit through these stomata. So when they're open, it allows carbon dioxide in and gas to leave. And you notice that there are these round cells, like these smooth, kind of crescent-shaped cells around it. Those are called guard cells. So they're what allow the stomata, or well, one stoma, multiple stomata, they will allow the stomata to open. And we want to keep them open when we can in order to allow for, again, the gas exchange. But there are also times where the plant doesn't want that, the guards or the stomata open. So the guard cells can also close up. You can see how it's not as open for this one and this one as well. So these guard cells are what allow the stomata to open and close as needed for the plants. Here in this picture on the bottom left, you can see how they're open here, creating that pore, the stoma, and how they can close up. They can straighten up and close up, closing the stomata or the stoma. Let's talk a little bit about how they do that and why. So how do they open? Well, it's based on a chemical reaction. Sunlight stimulates certain reactions within the guard cells. And the guard cells, when they get stimulated by the sunlight, what they're going to do is they're going to fill up with water. Now, when they fill up with water, it's going to cause them to bend outward. And when they bend outward, look, you can see it's an open pore. So they start off like this. The sunlight causes a reaction that's going to allow the guard cells to absorb excess water, floating them outward and opening up the stoma. Now, when they're open like that, carbon dioxide can easily flow in the stoma so that the leaf cells have access to it to allow for photosynthesis. It also allows the oxygen to leave the stoma and go out into the atmosphere. But just like how when we exhale, water vapor comes out with our breath, it's the same with the plant. When the stoma are open, oxygen isn't the only thing that's leaving. Also, water vapor can escape through the open stoma. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing because when the water vapor leaves through the leaves, it creates a pressure difference between the top and the bottom of the plant. This pressure difference acts like a straw. So when you drink through a straw, you're pulling the liquid at the top of the straw into your mouth. That creates a pressure difference and it sucks up more water from the base of the straw, which then sucks up water from the cup, kind of like this. Take my water cup. I gurgled so you can tell that I had water in my mouth. So what happens is by the water leaving the top of the straw and entering my mouth, it creates that pressure difference, which pulls the water up from the bottom of the straw to the top. Since there's now a difference of pressure in the bottom of the straw, it pulls the water from the cup into the straw. And that's what's going to happen with the plant and water. When water vapor leaves through the stoma, it creates that pressure difference and pulls water up from the roots to the leaves. Well, now there's that difference at the roots, so it's going to cause the roots to absorb more water from the soil. So it can have a good effect because it allows more water to be brought up into the plant. However, we may not always want to lose water vapor through our stomata. I say that like I'm a plant. I know I'm not. If the environment is dry or there's a drought, or for whatever reason, the plant isn't getting enough water, then having this additional water loss through the stomata can actually cause the plant to become hydrated, it can wilt, and it can die. Because yes, it creates that nice pressure where by releasing the water vapor, it pulls up the moisture from the roots and from the soil. What if there is no water in the soil? At this case, or in that case, then the dehydration will just result in a disruption to the homeostatic processes that occur within the plant. The plant cannot generally take in nutrients by themselves. So the nutrients in the soil usually get picked up when the water is absorbed. Well, if there's no water to absorb, you can't absorb the nutrients. Not only that, but water is also used in the process of photosynthesis. So the plant wants water. And if you don't have water, you can't do photosynthesis, which means the plant can't make glucose, which means the plant can't send the glucose to its mitochondria. It means the plant cannot get energy to power its cells, so it will die. When this occurs, the plant will actually close the stomata. And it does this because in these particular conditions, and now that homeostasis is out of whack in the plant, receptors detect that. They detect the change, the dryness, and it actually causes the plant to release a hormone. Yes, plants have hormones too. Surprise! Well, it's going to release this hormone, and that's going to cause the guard cells to release the water that they stored up. Remember, they absorb excess water in order to puff out and open the stomata. But the hormone is going to cause them to lose that water. It's going to allow them to straighten up and close the stomata, the stoma. So now the guard cells have relaxed, all the stomata are closed. Yes, no carbon dioxide is coming in, but on the other hand, you're not losing water vapor at this point. So the plant will hopefully use its excess stores of carbon dioxide to run photosynthesis until water becomes available once again. All right, so that's gas exchange in plants. Let's talk about thermoregulation. So we've already talked about this in terms of dogs and humans, but all thermoregulation is thermo referring to temperature, regulation, you know, regulating, keeping it what it should be. So thermoregulation is maintaining a stable body temperature under a variety of conditions. Now, some terms that you may not have heard before are endotherms and ectotherms, but you've heard there's more common variations. Endotherms are another way to refer to warm-blooded animals, like mammals. We are warm-blooded animals, so therefore we are endotherms. Endo means inside, and therms, again, refers to temperature or heat. It means that we maintain our own internal temperature. Ectotherms are cold-blooded organisms like reptiles and fish. Ecto means outside, therms again referring to temperature or heat. So ectotherms or cold-blooded animals are reliant on their environment, so these outside sources, to maintain their internal temperature. Now let's kind of talk about what that means again. Endotherms, we said, that means warm-blooded. Those are us mammals and actually also birds. We use different metabolic processes to manage our internal temperature. So we can evaporate heat from our skin, like we said, from, what's that thing called? Sweating. We can also absorb heat from other sources. That's why we like to sit in front of a fire, because we can absorb it. But we can also just, wrap ourselves in our blanket. If you've ever noticed, you wrap yourself in a blanket, particularly a heavy one like a fleece one, you may have started out cold, but once you put the blanket around you, you start to warm up, and then you might even become overheated. And that's because your body is giving off the heat. It's giving off the body heat. So it's actually giving off this thermal radiation that gets trapped in the blanket. And that's why we use blankets, because it traps our own body heat and keeps it to the outside so that we don't feel the cold. But we're actually generating this body heat within us via different metabolic processes. That's why sometimes you also might feel warmer after you eat food. Ectotherms, on the other hand, or cold-blooded animals, they are completely reliant on their external environment. So here we have our cute little lizard. It absorbs heat from the sun as well as from the rock. So when a lizard or an amphibian is too cold, they will actually actively go out into a sunny spot and just lay there, preferably on a hot rock, because then they're getting heat absorbed from the surface or from their backside, along their back because from the sun, but also along their stomach from the rock itself. So they're able to absorb the heat from all sides. If they become too hot though, then they're gonna move to a cooler environment. They're gonna go someplace, maybe in the shade, where they can cool off. You wrap a lizard in a blanket, it's not going to experience that change in temperature like what we do, because it's not their own body that generates body heat. They are completely reliant on the environment, the sun, to warm them up. Us, we can generate our own body heat. Lizards, they can't. Not sure where that picture went, but I will make sure that there is a picture there later. And not sure where that went. I will take care of that though, I promise. When this link is posted in the video description, that picture will be back up. Osmo regulation. Osmo again refers to water, like osmosis, and regulation, no. So osmo regulation is a strategy to maintain both water and salt balance, because a lot of times those go hand in hand with each other. So it's going to regulate the water balance in our body as well as sodium or sodium ion balance, salt balance. Now, freshwater and saltwater fish actually do it differently, even though they're both fish, but it's because they're in different environments. In a freshwater environment, there's not that much salt around the fish. So what happens is freshwater fish will try to absorb and retain or hold onto as much salt as possible. So when a fish breathes, the water goes in through their mouth and out through their gills. And as it leaves their gills, that's where it absorbs the oxygen at and releases carbon dioxide. But it doesn't just release or absorb oxygen and release carbon dioxide. It can also take in salt and water through the gills as well. So when the water goes in through the mouth and out through the gills, it can actually absorb some of the water into the gills in order to stay hydrated. It can also absorb some salt into the gills. Also, when they eat, I mean, if they're eating stuff underwater, then you know some water is going to be trapped as they collect food. So when they eat food, water gets taken in as well, goes into the body systems, the digestive systems. Now, as it goes through the digestive system, salt and water gets absorbed into the bloodstream, which then make their way to the kidney. Most of the salt is actually reabsorbed by the kidney. So instead of getting rid of the salt via the excretory system, the kidneys will reabsorb it and hold on to it and keep it in the body. But they will get rid of the excess water. So what happens is freshwater fish tend to have very, very diluted urine because they're trying to get rid of all the extra water they took in order to get the salt. Now, saltwater fish are completely opposite. They try to actually get rid of as much salt as possible and take in as much water as possible because, well, look at their environment. They are surrounded by a super salty environment. So what happens is they're going to take in salt and water through their food and as well as by drinking. So notice we didn't mention the freshwater fish drinking. They didn't. They didn't just open their mouth in order to swallow water by itself. But saltwater fish will. So when they catch food, water and salt get trapped in with it, goes down to their digestive system. But they also will just open up their mouths and gulp down water as is. Now what happens is the kidneys will extract the extra salt from their blood system and from the body, and they will use that to create a very concentrated salty urine. So they have a super salty concentrated urine that they're getting rid of, because what's going to happen is when they go through and digest and absorb, they're going to try and absorb and retain as much water as possible. That means they're not really going to have any that's taken out and filtered by the kidneys and released through the excretory system. They're going to have very, very little water released that way. And it's all going to primarily be through, or primarily retained inside their body in order to keep them hydrated in this very, very salty environment that would otherwise dehydrate them. Now they also can get rid of excess salt through their gills. So remember how in the freshwater fish, when the water passed through their gills, they absorb salt and water at their gills. Well, what happens here is excess salt can also be deposited at the gills, and as the water flows through the gills, the excess salt is released back into the water and into the environment around them. Here's just kind of a picture showing that. So the lighter arrow is the water, the darker arrow is the salt, and the size of the arrow is talking about how much of that one. So a lot of salt and water are entering the mouth. You can get rid of them through the gills, as well as a little bit of salt, very, very little water through the urine. Here we have the freshwater fish, a little bit of salt, but a lot of water taken in through the mouth as well as through the gills. A lot of water is excreted, very, very little salt is excreted. All right. And what about land animals then? Well, we actually kind of, when we do our osmoregulation, it's actually very similar to how saltwater fish do. Because again, we're not surrounded by fresh water around us. So we're in an environment that can easily dehydrate us. So when we want to maintain osmotic balance, just like how the saltwater fish did it, we want to retain as much water as possible and get rid of as much salt as possible. So kidneys, as we go through, we drink water, or water is there with our food, goes to our digestive system, gets absorbed into our circulatory system, makes its way to the kidney. The kidney is going to reabsorb a lot of the water. Now, if you're overhydrated, it will get rid of excess water via the excretory system. But that's only when you're overhydrated. If you are dehydrated, it's going to reabsorb as much water as it can. And it will actually get rid of and filter out the excess salt to make a concentrated urine. And that's actually why the, not to be kind of gross about it, why your urine can be anywhere from dark yellow to completely clear. When it's dark yellow, then it's super concentrated, meaning that you don't have a lot of water in your system. So the kidneys reabsorb most of it in order to keep your body hydrated. When your urine is clear, like completely clear, then that means that you have a lot of excess water in your system, more than can keep your body hydrated. So your kidneys are getting rid of the extra water with your urine. Nitrogenous wastes also affect land animals' ability to maintain osmotic pressure. So fish and animals excrete this waste as urea, which is water soluble, which is why it can be diluted into our urine. So urea is The nitrogenous waste that's, I mean, your urine isn't just salt and water. It also has urea in it. And urea can very easily dissolve in water. It's water soluble, which is why when you go to the bathroom and you urinate, it just looks like a pretty standard liquid. You don't generally notice chunks in your urine. If you do, please go to the doctor. But the urea is dissolved in the excess water and released as urine. However, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and insects, they do not excrete the nitrogenous waste as urea. They excrete it as uric acid. And the thing about uric acid is it is not water soluble. It's insoluble, meaning it cannot be diluted by the water. And a lot of times this is a way for them to conserve water, and it makes this super highly concentrated form of urine. Now, if you've ever seen bird poop, which I'm sure most of you have, or it's kind of bird poop, that you've seen it on cars, like the white paste, sometimes with actual dark chunkies in it. So the dark chunkies are the poop, but that white paste, that is their, essentially their urine. It's not the same urine as us, it's the uric acid and the sodium and the salt. But that's why it's more pasty than liquidy, because it cannot be dissolved in the water like our waste can. So it ends up being more pasty. All right. So now we just have our additional resources to talk about. So Science in Pajamas, we have one on gas exchange in plants. We have one on osmo regulation, talking about the fishies. And one on thermoregulation. So we kind of compare how dogs and humans thermoregulate or regulate their body temperatures. In terms of other videos, we have Sentry Tech, which looks at gas exchange in plants. We have Animal Physiology, freshwater fish versus saltwater fish in ion regulation. We have SciShow, Do Fish Drink Water? And we have Few School, temperature regulation of the human body. So again, talking about thermoregulation. All right, I will have this link for this entire presentation in our Google, in our video description. I will have that picture fixed for you guys. But yeah, in the meantime, if you have questions, hit me up in Google Classroom or in our email or in class. But in the meantime, you guys, just take care of yourselves, all right? Stay awesome, stay curious, stay safe and healthy. All right, you guys, take care.